Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. I'm Councillor Robert Parker and I'm Chair of the Board. Welcome to all members and officers in attendance today. As usual, the video feed on this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council website. I'd also like to welcome any members of the press and public who are watching our meeting online today. As the meeting is being streamed in the usual way, I'd like to remind you all that your comments will remain accessible online and can be reported by the media. Could I welcome the following Executive Councillors and Executive Support Councillors who are attending our meeting today. Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of the Council, Councillor Richard Bootroyd, Executive Council for People Management, and I think we might be expecting Councillor Hilton Spratt as well. Okay. As well, I'd also like to welcome two members of the corporate support team, Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive, and Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources. As usual, I'd like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill planned for this morning, so in the event of a fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the doors behind you and leave the building through the reception area into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park for further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure that your mobiles are on silent? Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch on your microphone, otherwise those attending meetings via Teams and members of the press and public listening to our meeting online won't be able to hear you. Can you also please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphone to be heard? And as usual, if you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand and our Vice Chair, Councillor Tom Smith, will make a note. Can we now move to the agenda for today's meeting? Item 1 is apologies for absence and replacement members. Emily, can you tell us about apologies and replacement members, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Kendrick, Councillor Carrington, Martin Kyle, and I'll also note Councillor Whittington's apologies.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations councillors of interest. Members of the board are reminded they only need to declare any relevant interest which has not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interest form. Do any members wish to declare any particular interest in any item on the agenda? No, thank you. If we then move to our agenda before us today, item 3 is minutes of the meeting the 27th of April 2023, and we have a proposition to confirm and sign the minutes from the last meeting of the board on the 27th of April as a correct record. Can we go through it a page at a time first? Does anybody want to raise any accuracies and can we confirm it's a correct record? Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and then finally page 11. Okay. Do I have a proposer and a seconder on the minutes, please?
Propose, Chair.
Yeah. Moved by Councillor Smith.
Councillor Pepper.
Councillor Pepper, thank you. So, can we now vote on the minutes? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? None. Any abstentions? None. Thank you. Announcements by the Chair, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. As far as I'm concerned as Chair, I have no announcements to make today. Executive Councillor announcements. Councillor Hill and Councillor Bootroyd, do you have any announcements to make?
Yes, I've just got a couple, thank you, Chairman. First on devolution, now that the elections, district for council elections are over and PERD has finished, there are now conversations will be starting with government about a potential devolution deal for Greater Lincolnshire, which potentially could have agreement this year with a mind for a mayoral election in 2025. Stress that these are currently negotiations, both with government and within the Greater Lincolnshire area. So if things go reasonably well. Obviously, reports will be then coming back to this council to on progress, but also in terms of a potential deal which can be then submitted to government, and then it will be up to the government to accept or not the deal which is being proposed. So things seem to be going reasonably well at the moment, but we will have to wait and see to see how far it goes. And of course, there will be a consultation period as well if this deal is provisionally agreed by the government and all the upper tier councils in Greater Lincolnshire. Second one is Scampton. That still is ongoing situation, and there are weekly meetings, quite a lot of meetings going on within Greater Lincolnshire, Lincolnshire, in particular West Lindsey District Council, City of Lincoln Council and the County Council. We're absolutely looking at the consequences, but also intense discussions on with government and the Home Office in particular to understand what the government's plans are. But at the information at the moment, there will be no activity on the ground until at least August, but it is a fast-moving situation, and we are, the relevant authorities are doing our best to keep abreast of what the government's intentions are and make plans accordingly.
Councillor Dilks, sorry, there's not usually opportunity to ask questions.
There's not?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Announcements, but I'm happy on this occasion, but I don't want it
Okay.
to be...
I was just wondering if the leader might tell us, say, obviously West Lindsey is taking legal action, or has done, and I gather they are appealing the early sort of decision. Does this council have a view on whether Scampton is the right place or not?
Obviously, the issue is that West Lindsey, in partnership with Braintree District Council and Essex, are both in the process of a legal challenge to where we are. So I think there are concerns about the use of Scampton and whether, you know, if it is used, not our decision, of course, whether the appropriate arrangements will be put in place.
Moving on, Richard, do you have any announcements to make?
Thank you, Chairman. No, not this morning.
Okay. Chief officers. Right.
No, nothing from me, thank you.
Nor me, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. If we move to item 5, then consideration of call-ins. Emily, do we have any call-ins?
No, none received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 6, calls for action. Again, Emily, have we had any councillor calls for action?
None received.
Thank you. Lovely. So we move to the first of the two substantive items on the agenda. Item 7 is approval to procure a contract for print and distribution of County News Residents Magazine. Pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Leader of the Council between the 30th of May and the 13th of June. And we're required to consider the attached report and agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Leader of the Council. Leanne.
Thank you, Chairman. So we are seeking support for the procurement of a new contract for the print and distribution element of the County News Residents magazine and the delegation of the necessary decisions to the Chief Executive. The Council currently prints and distributes approximately 355,000 copies of the County News magazine to Lincolnshire residents 3 times a year and is distributed across all 7 of the county's district council areas. The current contract for the print and distribution of the County News is with the National Leaflet Company and is due to end in December 2023 with no further extensions available. The Council has a good relationship with the National Leaflet Company, and having a single provider for both print and distribution functions has worked really well. There are no issues with the interaction between the printer and the distributor, and the contract management of a single contract is simple and effective. The National Leaflet Company consistently meet our deadlines for print, including the provision of proofs and layouts for final sign-off, and the delivery of the magazine is to our requirements. At the current price of 21.4 pence per copy, which includes the print and distribution and also the design element, the County News represents the best value way we can distribute information about key council services to as close to 100% of Lincolnshire's residents as possible. Electronic newsletters are used by the organisation. However, it would be reliant on the sign-up of the newsletters, and Lincolnshire is the largest at just over 22,000 subscribers at a cost of just over £500 a month. Not all of the subscribers are Lincolnshire residents, and they generally only receive information about one area of the council's services. For the procurement route, we are proposing using the restricted procedure as we did for the previous contract. The restricted procedure is a two-stage process which is used where there are a large number of suppliers within the market. The first phase, which is open to the entire market, is where suppliers submit a selection questionnaire, and the council assesses their experience, capacity and capability, including their financial capability, to deliver the contract. The top 5 scoring suppliers are then invited to the tender stage, which is the second phase whereby we evaluate the supplier's proposed approach to delivering our requirements. So this enables us to offer the council's requirements to the largest possible market while restricting evaluations to only those providers with the capacity and capability to meet the council's requirements. This procedure also allows us to keep the evaluations and the resources required at a manageable level. The restricted procedure also mitigates the risk of contracting with a supplier who does not have the capacity, both in terms of financial stability and the resources required to print over 1 million copies per year. We're proposing a 4-year contract with an additional option of a 2-year extension. This would include a no-fault termination of 3 months to give the council room to cease the publication of county news if required. It is proposed that the contract payment mechanism should fix core printing rates, which include overheads, ink, labour and wet proofs for the first 2 years of the contract, to allow for some of the current inflationary pressures to subside. Subsequent years will be indexed against CPI. The paper and distribution costs will be subject to an annual review, as costs are more volatile and some elements of these are subject to deflationary measures, for example, fuel costs. And the new contract will be managed through similar performance measures to the current contract, which will focus on quality standards of the print, a minimum distribution rate of 95% of all households and businesses to have received a copy of county news within the specified timescales, and ensuring the printer has adequate stocks of the specified paper and associated printing materials at all times. We'd like to invite any questions.
Thanks for that. Carl, do you want to add anything?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay. Questions? Anybody want to raise anything about our county news? Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report, which I just got this morning. I just welcome the report, thank you. And who prints it currently? Is it printed in Lincolnshire? Is it still Morton's?
It's the National Leaflet Company.
It's not a Lincolnshire company? No. That was my question, was, you know, is it... there are companies within Lincolnshire capable of certainly of printing. I don't know about distribution. But, you know, I think about Morton's, obviously, at Horncastle, that one time used to print it, and they do a lot of national magazines, and Warner's in Bourne, in South Kesteven, you know, are a big, you know, they print a lot of national magazines. So I suppose my question is, you know, will they be invited to tender, and particularly, and will they be given any favour, being a local company?
So under the restricted procedure, anybody will be able to bid for it. So it will be open. So those local companies will have an opportunity to go for it.
Okay. I've got Martin, Nigel and Hugo. I'll give members of OSMB priority. So, Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to talk about the distribution. I disagree with the officer's comments about there's been no issues about it. I've previously spoken to Chief Executive in the past. I've spoken to the leader in the past about the non-distribution in Crowland, yeah? I've been on this council for 10 years or so now, and I've hardly ever seen one in Crowland. If it wasn't for coming here, these council meetings, I'd never hardly see it. It just doesn't go for me. That goes for the vast majority of the residents in Crowland. some of your officers drilled down and looked into it a year or two back, and scrutinised the delivery company, and they came up with pictures, photos of various road signs of where they've been delivered. Well, I knocked on doors down these roads, and none of the people had had them. Yeah, I've mentioned it at various surgeries I've had in Crowland. I've mentioned it on social media, and it's just a scant delivery, just a food thrown here and there, I believe. Yeah, and I think and going forward, that needs addressing. Thank you.
What I'm going to suggest is that you may want to make an answer now, but I think there is some work outside this meeting for you to satisfy Councillor Pepper about what he's said. Okay, well that's even better then. Okay.
Councillor Pepper's point, yes, he is correct. There are issues because, as you say in the report, we currently use National Leaflet Company, who in themselves then use Royal Mail. And the Royal Mail distribution method is on postcode areas. And obviously they're on the edges of the county area. Some postcode areas overlap into other parts. So, for example, Crowland overlaps into Peterborough, and in the north we have overlaps into Doncaster area. So obviously in those areas it's not possible to do that. And obviously at the moment, we'll see what happens in the future, National Leaflet Company are the most efficient and cheapest method of delivering county news, but there is an issue in Crowland, and you know this has been raised, and we were told that measures have been put in place, as Nigel has said, to make sure these are delivered. But obviously, if it's still an issue, we'll look at it again. But I'm not sure that I think we have done research into what's going on in Crowland, because obviously it's got to be a separate delivery to the post office, because Royal Mail are not the most flexible of companies to deal with, shall we say, but still probably the best, most effective way of doing it. So we'll can look it into again, but I thought we had got arrangements in place, but we'll have to revisit that, as indeed we do on the other areas in North and West Lincolnshire.
Can anybody tell me, or tell the meeting, how many people or households are affected on what we might call the periphery, where there's an overlap outside of Lincolnshire? Numbers. So we don't even know the extent of the size of the problem.
Yeah, we do, because it's wherever there's wherever the Royal Mail, the post. This is on the current contract.
I understand exactly what you say, Martin, but I just wondered if anybody could convert your.
I can't. I don't know, to be honest.
No, I can't, I'm afraid. Happy to take it away and have a look into it.
It's a good start, isn't it, to know how many people we're talking about. Okay. Right. Hugo.
Morning, Chairman. Thank you. There was me thinking it was the postman hadn't got web feet, which was why I couldn't get to those sort of areas. But anyway, on a more serious note, roll back a few years. We used to produce it every month. And actually we reformed it down to now quarterly, and I have to say I think it's absolutely spot on. I mean, it communicates and connects with the people, it sits on their coffee tables. You know what, it's a great, interesting magazine, and I think it's something we should be proud of, and the fact that it's not digital, and for once people can actually, if they haven't got digital and everything else, they can read and keep engaged and up to date on what the council's doing, and I think it's a brilliant magazine. So that's all I've got to say on that one. Thank you.
Thanks. Martin, is there anything you wanted to say in a general sense?
No, I mean, just to say it is now 3 times a year, not quarterly. We've gone down. But I think the advice is that if you go below that, you really, it probably loses its relevance. But I think you're correct there in terms of diversity, that making sure we, you know, as the paper says, we have a substantial number of older people in the county, and it's just one mechanism whereby we can keep in touch with those residents, tell the residents what we're doing, and fulfil our obligations in terms of diversity, but also informing the public of the actions of the county council.
Excuse me, anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Dills.
Thanks for allowing me to come back, Mr. Chairman. It's just on the postcodes, I'm a bit surprised that the post office doesn't know that Crowland is in Lincolnshire. You know, each ward, when you know, on the voting lists, you know, each street is listed with its postcodes, so they should be challenged, and I'm sure they have been on that. Can I just say, I'm just reminded me Hugo's comment about online. You know, South Kesteven have taken a different approach. The previous administration has taken a different approach, and they are making it online, not distributing it. I appreciate that it's been looked at and come to a conclusion. I'm not making saying which way is better, and I appreciate the reason that we are continuing to publish it in hard copies. But it was, I believe it was a financial consideration at South Kesteven where they decided to switch it to online from this coming year.
Yeah, I mean, every local council actually makes decisions based on what it sees as being appropriate for its particular area and cost. I, for one, personally support the idea of it being put in print form for the reasons I just said, stated in the report, that not everybody is online, and particularly it has a negative impact on older people who tend not to be so into what we might call telecommunications. Sorry, did you want to?
Yeah, just, I mean, it's in, I know a lot of councils have gone online with their you know, as Councillor Dilks says. I think the interesting thing is what the reach is, because you have to subscribe. You don't have to pay, but for example, I live in South Kesteven, like Councillor Dilks, you have to subscribe to it, and the reach is, it'll be interesting to see what the reach is. I know some councils went online and then they realised that, you know, the reach wasn't great and the numbers of people actually subscribing wasn't great, whereas there is an expense, but you are hitting every letterbox, nearly every letterbox, Councillor Becker, in the county, which, you know, does mean everybody gets in, and by its very nature, everybody, including those who aren't online. Obviously, some people are online, and young people, they tend not to read any sort of print these days. It's all on the screen. So it's all about a variety of methods of communicating with the public. But I think it would be interesting to see how the experiment works in South Kesteven in terms of numbers who are actually subscribing to the newsletter.
I suppose, bearing in mind that this is a meeting that's been communicated through the internet, if there's any members of the press and public listening, then perhaps they might want to contact us and tell us their thoughts. Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to go back on some points that have been made, because I think it's important. Personally, and this is a personal thing as well, I am younger than most who you would think would possibly want to read it online. I'm a bit old-fashioned in that sense. If I want to read a magazine or read a book, I like a physical thing to read and hold in my hands, especially because my emails, I have enough on my personal emails. I don't really want something else coming through it. That's before you get, as has been alluded to, the issue of GDPR and having to sign up for every single section and every single bit. And, you know, it's an element of, unless it's given to somebody and it's there, very few will actively go and look for it. And the NHS have found this when they've put advice and things online. Unless it's handed to somebody or it's there in the surgery or what have you. This isn't an age thing, this is just a societal thing of actually people just will not, unless they're an exception to the rule, very few will just go and look for it. So you will lose a lot of people. I think, as Councillor the Leader said, it will be very interesting to compare and contrast the reach issues, notwithstanding that Councillor Pepper's mentioned. And obviously, as has been alluded to, obviously each council makes their own decisions and their own reasonings for it. But I think we've made, for us, we've made the right decision, and I think we should definitely support the paper, and I certainly will be, Chairman.
Thanks. Jackie, did I just see your head nod?
You did, yeah.
Great,
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick comment. I think one of the important things is, even if we do use email, the thing about having the physical copy of the magazine is that it is a presence in your house. When you use email, you just sort of use it and you click off and it's gone, but the magazine is there. And both I know a lot of my residents dip into it. So you open, you flick through, oh, that's good, and you put it down, and you come back to it, and it's also ready and solid information. I think it's great. I think you do a really good job with it, I must say. It's a very enjoyable and warm publication. It welcomes you into itself, so, you know, keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Leon, anything you want to comment on finally?
No further comments other than Councillor Pepper. There are service credits that will be going into the new contract that are regarding distribution rates, and we will be applying service credits for areas where it hasn't been delivered if it falls within the over the 95% of not reaching every household.
Fine, thank you. So if nobody else wants to speak, we've got 2 actions required. Consider the attached report and determine whether the board supports the recommendation to the Leader of the Council, and agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Leader of the Council. The Leader of the Council's been here. So they're the 2 proposals. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against? None. Abstentions? None. It's carried. Thank you. Okay, if we can now move to agenda item 8. Welcome, Tony. People Management Update Q4. The purpose of the report is to provide an update on HR management information and on corporate people strategy projects for Q4. And we're being asked to seek assurance on HR management information and to review the progress on the 2021-24 people strategy. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So, yeah, just to give some of the highlights of the current workforce metrics in relation to the Council, and then to move on just to one particular aspect of this report, which is around the people strategy and the outcomes of the culture and leadership stocktake that we've undertaken. So in terms of the workforce metrics, just to give you, as I say, the highlights, as we've seen probably over the last sort of 9 months or so, there has been a steady or so decline in a number of sort of the metrics that we've had. And it was, again, pleasing to see that come the end of the financial year, that in Q4, voluntary turnover, there was a further reduction to 9.65, which, considering we have been within the 10 to 11% turnover, is pleasing to see that that has come down, and that some of the actions that are contributing to that we took around attraction and retention. In terms of sickness absence, again, colleagues will know that the County Council has a benchmark target of 7.5 days per employee per year. That in the last 12 months, that has been, for a number of reasons, we've been struggling to meet that target. But there has been that steady decrease over a period of time. Again, for the end of the financial year, for Q4, we saw the directorates, the total council standing at 7.77 days, again, which is the closest we've been to the 7.5 for some time. And obviously, there's been lots of reasons why we've seen a rise in the past in sickness absence following the pandemic, but it's pleasing to see that figure going down as well. In terms of agency spend, in the last quarter we saw a decrease of about 200,000, but the current end expenditure on the agency is expected to be around 6.8 million, which is a 12% increase on 21-22. I think it's important to note that in terms of agency, it shouldn't always be viewed necessarily as a negative thing, in that clearly the fact that we are able to use agency, yes, it is of a higher rate, there's no doubt about that, but it does provide us with consistency in some of those areas where we're running 24/7 services like residential, children's care, as well as in areas like Place, where there's been difficulties in recruiting specialist project managers, and the need for that to enable us to carry out some of the work that we need. So it has gone up. Given the inflationary pressures, I guess, again, 6.8 is in terms of comparison to last year, not a surprise, given some of the increases in numbers of inflation and such like. So I think overall, in terms of the metrics, we've seen a positive movement in terms of turnover, sickness absence and agency spend. Obviously not to become complacent, and let's hope that we get some of those further down during the next year. I'm going to move on now to the outcome of the culture and leadership stock take that we undertook. So just to remind members that we undertook a stock take. We started it in June last year and finished it around December time. And the aim of this was to look across 4 work streams, involve as many employees as we could, which in the end we probably took into account about 700. And the purpose of this was to understand from a culture and leadership perspective the things that we're doing well and the things that we need to develop more. And it was pleasing to say we involved around 70 employees as in part of the activity of getting that information and responses. So there were six areas that the culture and leadership stocktake focuses on: learning, innovation, goals and performance, teamwork, vision and values, support and compassion, equality, diversity and inclusion. The methodology is based on evidence-based. It's part of academic work that has been taken up by the University of Lancaster and has been subject to audit and verification by a number of universities as well in terms of its effectiveness. So we've maintained that methodology. In terms of sort of the highlights, I just wanted to sort of pick out where the responses around the council's performance has been good in terms of culture. And so if we look in learning innovation, there's the positivity around that the council's seen as encouraging learning and development, and that the expansion of the apprenticeships has been seen as a real positive by employees and leaders. Success, again, is seen as something that we are good at as a council, but perhaps we need to celebrate that more widely so we can learn from good practice. Within goals of performance, again, pleasing to see that responses around the corporate leadership team being more visible as a group because of the regular briefings and communications that CLT do. There was positive around the revised appraisal process and the smarter working policy, which enables a bit more flexible working and people being more sort of effective in their roles and responsibilities. From a teamwork perspective, it was positives around how teams work within the council, within their directorates, and how they meet their objectives. And from a vision and values perspective, there was positivity around, again, the staff briefings that we do on a regular basis and the wide attendance that we do get on that in terms of people understanding the council's corporate journey and where we go. Again, in terms of management practices, for support and compassion, it was recognised that there was a high support and compassion amongst colleagues and peers. And of note was the positive focus on health, well-being and smarter working within the council, and which of course we've talked about here on numerous occasions, and also recognition that technology, particularly around Teams, has helped colleagues to work more effectively together, and the staff briefings being a good example. And then finally, on equality, diversity, inclusion, there was a recognition that council has progressed this particular area very well in the last sort of 12 to 18 months with in terms of commitment by our by CLT and the directorates, the involvement of staff networks, the leadership from our equality diversity roles, and a greater involvement from members as well, which has been really, really welcomed. In terms of sort of areas for development, so I think it was fair to say in learning and innovation, there was recognition that there was more work required around how as an organisation we learn lessons, and how we balance that out with, you know, we have to hold people to account for the actions that they do. So there was a need to balance those two things out. A sort of strong theme within the 6 areas is around the one council. So obviously our ambition as a council is to represent every interest of the council regardless of which directorate we work in. And there's a need for the directorates to perhaps work more effectively on that across each of the directorates, which is good. So in terms of goals and performance, again, the council vision was further development needed on that, and there was some inconsistency around individual employees receiving the appropriate one-to-one meetings by some services. So again, work that to build on there. And there was a view that poor performance, whilst it happens clearly, there's some inconsistency in the way that that is challenged and managed. In teamwork, there was a recognition that we need, as particularly at senior level, there needs to be a better understanding of effective working relationships within a political environment, especially with members. And again, reference to the one council, and perhaps that Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue are seen sort of out of scope within that and how we integrate that. And then comment on resources functions and the fact they've needed to support, they needed support in some areas to help the needs of customers. Visions and values, again, that was seen as not always seen as the central way in which LCC operates, council operates, and not always modelled by some leaders, and that we need a culture to support the ability to speak up against poor behaviours that we see. And then finally, within support and compassion, again, a recognition that there is many leaders that demonstrate good support, good compassion, and positive behaviours, but that always is. But there is some inconsistency there and needs further development. So that was the feedback. You'll note there is an actions there that we are taking as a council as a consequence of this. I'm working with the corporate leadership team to further define what that looks like next month at their away day. So what I'll do now, I'll pause there and ask for any questions.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Tony. Yeah, Eddie.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Tony, for your report. Just looking at the tables and the graphs here and at the bottom of the report, basically, I'm trying to figure out why I'm talking about sickness days lost per full-time employment, 2020 quarter 4, 2021 quarter 1, and indeed 21 quarter 2 and 21. We're in the peak of the COVID pandemic there, and yet we've met the targets in that sense. Now, it seems a conundrum, really, that you would expect that figure to be higher, and I'm just wondering whether you could explain if there is an explanation for that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I think what most organisations saw as a consequence of the pandemic was that whilst there was an increase in clearly influenza type symptoms, other symptoms that would normally have been attributed to work lessened significantly because people weren't at the workplace. So a large number of those viral infections didn't take place because people were working from home. People were not moving around, and so it's widely recognised that across most employers that they saw a reduction in that sickness absence because of that. There's also the fact that obviously the priority being the pandemic, some of the underlying more long-term conditions were not as prioritised by the NHS because of the waves, and consequently individuals who were unaware of, unable to have their particular symptoms, whatever, treated, or unaware that they had illnesses. So again, that I guess contributed to some extent in things like elective surgery and those sorts of things, as well as reductions in things like road traffic collisions and that sort of thing. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You would have expected it to have gone up, but because I think of the isolation of individuals, it saw a reduction.
Okay. Yep. I've got Jackie next, and then Mike.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you ever so much for the report. Very interesting. Some things in it concern me. One is there's a sort of slight thread through it about leadership or management, some concerns that members of staff have about management. Lots of very, very good and positive things in here as well, of course. And I wonder, to what extent do our managers have at the different levels, have the flexibility to manage according to the individual styles of the workers rather than their own individual management styles? So if they have a team and one team member needs micromanaging when somebody else needs a hand-off approach, and each would find the opposing position bad to work for or work with, are our managers given support and advice to actually be flexible in that way? That's my first question, Chairman. Did you want to?
Part A.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there is a recognition that when it comes to things like performance management, that the example you gave there about micromanagement of some individuals, where performance needs to be micromanaged to some extent, that needs to happen. And our managers do understand that there are different approaches to different individuals. I think it's more around, and just picking up on that, I think there's probably an acceptance that if you're an individual that is being micromanaged or performance managed in a particular way, that you would view that negatively, and that some of that may come across within this. However, I think it's not so much that particular aspect of performance that we want to improve on. It's more around the way in which you would do that, more around the behaviours in doing that, because clearly the way you behave with employees should be relatively consistent in terms of the way you approach particular issues, how you come across, etc. So I think it's more around that, but you're absolutely right. There are different approaches you need to take with individuals. If you have a complete blanket approach, it won't be effective. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And my second one, may I?
Yeah, just before you go on, Debbie, is there anything you want to say in the context of the differential point that was made, essentially?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that really sort of by saying some of the actions that we want to take place. So I think that we're certainly looking at how we can provide much more sort of targeted leadership development, particularly for new managers. Our managers tend to get promoted because of their technical expertise, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've got all of the required management competencies. So in terms of that consistency, we're looking at developing a leadership programme targeting particularly new managers new into that role, so that actually we can provide support and training around what the standard would be expected in Lincolnshire.
Thank you. Yeah, part B.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I know this is an area where I have real concern. I'm looking at page 14D, which is a sickness absence. I know that in adult social care and community wellbeing and children's, the figures are slightly higher. I'm actually surprised that they're as low as they are, given the nature of the jobs that those people have. Generally speaking, and this is a biggie with me actually, because personal interest, some of my family members actually use the services. Those people are in a situation where they are dealing with grief and trouble and problems and heartbreaking issues every single day of the week. And there is no way that the kind of person who goes into these jobs, who generally are fundamentally kind and supportive people, are going to be able to do that without it affecting them. So for them to actually have these sickness levels at these levels, I would see as pretty good, to be fair. What worries me, though, and in an ideal world where we had tons and tons of money, I'd be sort of suggesting, is there any way of taking these particular members of staff, colleagues, out of the relentless situation where they are? They're either dealing with serious problems or they're somewhere else writing about serious problems and thinking about it. And the impact on them personally is huge. I mean, I have several times heard people talking about going into heartbreaking situations, and that says a lot about their response. And I just wondered, is there any facility anywhere in the council to actually take these people out of that situation? In an ideal world, I would say a day a week. Get them to do something else that's positive, that's nothing to do with the difficult situations that they have to deal with. Now, I know that that's not realistic. But is there anything, and I don't mean just a team meeting with cakes, you can't send them to cinema because people would complain, but something is positive to lift them on a regular basis, to help support them and to actually help bring these sickness levels down a little bit more. I think they're absolutely amazing to achieve what they have here, and I think it's important that we recognise that. Thank you, Chairman.
That's quite an innovative approach, but first...
If I just start and Tony can come on in, because thank you very much, Councillor Brockway. Our staff do experience some really challenging circumstances, particularly those staff who are out working with families, with older people, with adults with learning disability. So in those sort of children and adults areas, as well as fire and rescue, they're under quite significant pressure. Certainly all of the national research is what is fundamental and what's really important to support people's resilience in terms of working within those environments. It is around effective supervision. So the role of the manager in providing regular monthly supervision, where they have professional supervision and what we call personal supervision. So the professional supervision is to go through the cases and make sure that the cases are safe, but then personal supervision about understanding exactly how that individual is feeling, what their welfare is, how they can identify any triggers which mean that they're finding things particularly difficult. Obviously, it's then up to the manager to then make sure that there is support, networks of support in place for that individual. And there's a whole raft of sort of things that the manager could do. If there's a particular case that's distressing, they can look at co-working it. They could look at changing it to a more experienced worker. So there's a whole raft of mechanisms to support people. But the way that we do it in terms of identifying what people need is through supervision.
Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Say thank you for the report. It was really interesting, and it's good to see the improvements that were reported, particularly involuntary turnover and sickness absence. But going to the culture and leadership survey that was done and the work that's been done on that, my points are along the same lines as Jackie. I was looking at the vision and values, and there is a perception that some senior leaders do not understand the challenges faced by employees working on the front line. And I just wondered what is common practice in the County Council. Do senior managers go out and spend time with people on the front line, time with them doing the job, to see what their challenges are and try and understand? Because very often sitting back in the office at the top there, if you don't, you get things reported back to you, but if you're not actually out there with someone and seeing the challenges that they face, it's difficult to really understand. I know when back in the day when I was in management, before I sort of took retirement, that was a common practice, that senior managers went out and used to call it walking the job, and go out and spend a day with people on a regular basis to see actually what's happening and the challenges that people face. Do we do anything like that within the county council?
The short answer, the short answer is yes. In fact, actually, I think it's next week that I'm going to one of the day centres as well. So all the way through the organisation. I think it's fair to say as well that a lot of portfolio holders also go out, either with their exec directors, and certainly a number of scrutiny committees also go out. So absolutely, we do go out and understand. I think some of the challenges sometimes is that if a manager has got a new case to allocate, they need to allocate that case, and sometimes they need to, you know, put pressure on individuals because a child needs to be safeguarded or an adult needs an assessment. So sometimes it is really difficult to manage, and so staff clearly will feel sometimes they've got additional pressure being faced upon them because the service needs a priority. But absolutely, all managers go out and spend time with staff.
That's okay, Mike.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It just it makes me wonder then where this perception comes from that the senior managers don't understand what's going on the front line and the challenges. That was all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is talking to staff, and you know, I mean, I suppose that case in terms of you know, a social work manager has got a case been referred. Somebody needs to go out and safeguard that child today, and a social worker will need to do that. And sometimes I'm sure social workers or early help workers or you know, or other practitioners will say, I feel it's a bit unfair. You don't understand the demands that I've got. But the manager has to balance the work priorities and the individual's welfare needs as well. And it's not an easy decision sometimes.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. Phil.
Thanks, Chairman. Like Jackie, I've got two questions. I'll deal with the first one first, if I may, which is on the agency spend. And yes, thank you for the report. I understand, of course, why the highest spend should be in children's services and adult care for reasons Jackie alluded to, but I don't really understand why legal services is one of the highest spenders on agency spend, and I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that. Thank you.
Yep, Tony.
I'll defer to my Director of Resources.
Yeah, I'll take that, Chairman, if I can. Yeah, so we've had a challenging few years in the legal team space, particularly around childcare lawyers. So, like social workers are really hard to recruit areas. Childcare lawyers are as well. It's a very specialised area. Obviously, naturally, there's 150 odd upper tier authorities that are all competing in the same market for good childcare lawyers. So we have to do everything that we can to attract the best. The actual position is better than it has been over the past 3 years now, so we've nearly got a fully complemented internal team, but there are challenges still, and you know, some of that leaks into some of the other service provision areas within legal, but we're doing everything that we can with the support of Tony's team to ensure that we're doing things like growing our own team, bringing in legal apprentices, upskilling and what have you, to mitigate that insofar as that we can. But we need to do the work, like social workers need to be on the front line doing the work. We obviously also need to be able to provide the support at the back end of that process in terms of providing the legal support. So if we haven't got the full complement, we have to bring people in to help us support.
Okay, now part B.
Thank you, really helpful, thank you. Part B is, of course, on the culture and leadership survey, if I might, or stock take as it's called. I really welcome the fact that the you know, the staff, the feedback is what's in the results is going to go back to the staff to sort of look at. Of course, you know, in any organisation, we're a big organisation in relative terms. You know, there's going to be challenges, and clearly there are here. Inconsistency seems to be a sort of a theme through some of this, but I do find it's quite difficult to assess how big the problem is or might be. Or is even perceived to be, because you know there's no kind of numbers here. I welcome the fact, you know, it's an open report on the you know, what staff are sort of saying, but I'm really sort of asking, was there a sort of a more general question, sort of, would you view your employer or the way that you're dealt with in a positive light or a negative light? And I think if you had that, you'd kind of see how big the problem might be. And finally, I'd just sort of ask for a little bit more about in the actions as to, how we can or do we sort of drill down to some of these not complaints, but comments that staff have made. I assume it was anonymous, was it by department perhaps? Can you look at, different departments? How can we improve things, I suppose is what I'm looking at. Thank you.
Do you want to try the start there, Tony?
Yeah. No, thanks, Councillor Dilks. I guess just to respond to that. So the culture and leadership stocktake, as I say, it's backed with good empirical and academic research in terms of its effectiveness. What it's meant to do, it's not meant to be an absolute, it's meant to be an indicator of views of leadership within the council and managers and behaviours. It's not the type of. It wasn't just a survey as well, which is probably helpful to explain. It involved interviews as well with our top sort of 15 senior leaders, as an example. It involved focus groups with staff where they were giving feedback. There was only one aspect to it, which was sort of survey based. So it's a mix of different evidence bases, and as I say, it's meant to act as an indicator, and it's really more of a tool around continuous improvement. So how do we use so 700 as an example of individuals that have been involved in the process. That's a fairly large sample in terms of getting a feel for an organisation. It's not absolute scientific, but bottom line is it gives us an indicator of where some of the positive areas are and where some of the areas are for development. And so what we do is we use that information to then further progress where we can get better. In terms of drilling down to directorates and everything else, we don't use that approach with this because it's a corporate approach. It's confidential. And so obviously it would make it more difficult to drill down and to get more honesty about the organisation if we got to that specific. What we do have, obviously, and what will happen this November will be, in addition to this, so this is about leadership and behaviours and culture. What we will have in December and November and December is the staff survey, the employee survey, which is more akin to some of the questions that you've posed there, Councillor Dilks, in terms of, people's individual perceptions of the county council in various different areas. And obviously we use that as well as a method of continuous improvement and building on that. So I hope that helpful gives you a bit of context in terms of where this fits within that. So we do ask those questions, but in a different context. Thank you.
Andrew.
It was just to add some extra context to what Tony was saying, and he talked about the survey at the end. I think the way that we've sort of rationalised the results of this particular piece of work, and it's just a particular piece of work, is to do it in the round. So obviously the employee surveys that we run every year, 2 years or so, are really, really positive about this organisation. I think people are really proud to work for the county council. I think it's a good place to work and generally has a good culture. And this is sort of taking where, whether there may be less positive views about it, and then we're talking a very, very small percentage of the overall workforce when we get the survey. It's about how we take the organisation to the next level. So it's very good to great type thing in terms of its culture. So that's the way that we've rationalised it. I think personally, as a senior leader here, take the culture of the organisation very, very seriously. This is the fourth council I've worked for, and I've worked for lots of different types of councils. This is by far the best council to work for, I can say proudly as a senior leader, but also as a way that we provide that compassionate support for our staff, leaders, and you know, we're really committed to ensuring, you know, the next generation of leaders for the council are really well equipped to continue and make that even stronger, really. So I've been quiet so far on this particular part of the subject, so just wanted to add a couple of points to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Hugo.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose two areas. One is mental health. That's still the number one. I think the trouble is mental health's getting quite complicated. There's so much highlight and talk about it wherever you look on the television and everything else. But it's also one that, I hate to say it, but it's an easy one to use as well because you don't see it. And it's sort of, my view is the way to get around mental health is not to go to a GP and just get tanked up on a load of happy pills, although that is highly recommended by GPs. But the bottom line is it's about health and well-being. And it's about being active, it's about eating properly, and it's about exercise and keeping the blood flowing, oxygenating. I'm not saying this is just a general view, not specific view, because otherwise I'll get people calling me up and go, you have no idea what it's like. But and we don't know, that's the problem. But what we do know is a good health and well-being strategy helps, resolves and stops a lot of these issues coming forward. And I think that, you know, I went to the GPs the other day to have a health check, and the person giving me the health check was completely overweight, advising me how to eat healthily. It just doesn't really sit ideally, if you know what I mean. You know, there is a point that I think what we need to perhaps do is put more the health and well-being agenda in. I know we have one new Lincolnshire, but they don't do mental health. But actually, what they do is a weight management. But actually, the two actually tie in together. It's called doing some exercise. Go for a walk after work. You know, we're all limited by time, and we need to encourage this. People have forgotten how to actually, in some sense, look after themselves. You know, eat well and everything else. It's very easy to dine on fast food and dine on this and snack every day, but that doesn't really help your mental health. So, and I think we need to sort of perhaps put it a bit more at the forefront and try and address it much more rather than mental health issues, but actually the benefits of just being healthier and going for a walk and actually getting your mind at peace. I know when I'm at full throttle, you can feel the pressure building on your own self-mind if you don't, you know, and that's the point when you have to say to yourself, actually just step back or deal with it. And I think we perhaps need to sort of look at this area a bit more, and rather than just sort of relying on a GP mode of action, perhaps looking at sort of how we can maybe just bring in more new Lincolnshire or something to actually just get people a bit more conscious of their own health and well-being. Quite nice to get the views on that. The other part of this is the agency spend. Now, adults obviously sits up there with quite a bit. The problem is with a lot of this is there's two types to agency spend. One, we've got people going off ill, so back to the initial view. The second part is actually recruiting people within Lincolnshire into the industry. One of the things that I've looked at, and actually the government has released what they call the next steps to put people at the heart of care, plan for adult social care reform, system reform 2023 to 2025. And it does talk about, in effect, trying to plug the skills gap and recognising skills for carers. And at least that's on the agenda. I mean, they talk about international recruitment, but actually, yet they won't talk about international recruitment for agriculture, and we sit in an agricultural area. Come back to that, though, with the whole agency thing. One of the problems is our teachers go to school, get taught from a textbook, then go to university, taught from a textbook, and then leave university and get a degree and become a teacher, where they teach from a textbook. Actually, what they often don't know is actually the career paths. And there are so many career paths in adult social care that most people at school, if you went in, would just think, oh, it means working in a nursing home or a residential home. It's far beyond that. Our previous assistant director here, Caroline Nice, that was involved in adults, started out as a social worker and is now a director of adult social care. You know, that is the scale of opportunity that we can actually give people. They can go all over. They can go and work for a charity. They could do media work for a charity. You know, there's so many charities needed in adult social care. The problem is we actually haven't really mapped out how we can do career paths for kids at school so that they really open up their eyes into actually what could be wonderful career opportunities. And even that, like cooking and hospitality, you know, even at Lincoln, the numbers are really quite low, but the opportunities for careers are enormous from that one course. But people aren't really aware of those opportunities. And I think that the two tie in terms of health and well-being and, in effect, agency spend and trying to reduce it by highlighting it. And it's two areas which I think we, as a nation, fall short, not just this council, but as a nation. Can we do more?
Yeah, what we've got there is what can we do more of, and agency spend. So, do you want to pick them both?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Marfley. I think in terms of the first question around health and well-being, obviously, as a council, we have a people strategy. One of the 9 strands is about improving health and well-being of the workforce. I think in terms of our actions as a council for the workforce, I think we are good at what we do, but there is a limit. So I think in terms of the health and well-being initiatives that we do, and I know the sort of link between mental and physical health. We do physical activity type initiatives within the council. We've recently just had or we're currently in the middle of a step up challenge, which is used by employees. We obviously have the discounted gyms and that sort of thing. We also, in terms of the One New Lincolnshire, they're doing the MOTs, health MOTs for the workforce. We've also invested in the counselling service more around things around sort of grief management and such like. So, as well as we've still got the priority referral process for the mental health trust within Lincolnshire as part of the ICS. So, I do hear what you're saying. I think as a council we're doing as much as we possibly can, but I think there comes a point when other agencies have to step in as well and do their specialist roles as well, and I think that sometimes that's the difficulty. But I think we are investing in health and wellbeing initiatives, if that helps.
I mean, I know it says the trend is going down, but is it what I would call, if we look back over the last 5 years, where we perhaps put more energy into this whole area, are we seeing a downward trend generally? I mean, where we're seeing significant benefit. And one of the reasons why is that in some of those areas, if we pander to the needs, you don't get anywhere. If you actually are more forceful and say, you must do that course, because actually it's better for you and do it, it's actually sometimes better. We sometimes rely too much on being too nice. But is the trend actually going down over the last 5 years? Or is it still a struggle?
Okay, I think in terms of sickness absence, I haven't got the 5 years in front of me. I think it's fair to say sickness absence, if you take the pandemic out of the equation and the unusual nature, that sickness absence is generally, certainly is going down over the years, and or very least is plateauing. It's certainly not showing evidence that it is increasing on a significant basis. It is in some sectors, but I think here at the moment within this council, it isn't. I think it's difficult to give a clear correlation between some of the initiatives that we do on their own, because clearly we may be the best employer in the world, but if things at home aren't good, then clearly that still would have an impact on individuals. But I'd say certainly the overall indications are that as a council, our employees, their workforce, there is certainly been, as we've seen recently, a reduction, but in the last 5 years, overall reduction, but certainly and a plateauing perhaps, but certainly no increase in that.
Right, I've got a couple of questions. The first one I wanted to ask is that you made it clear that agency spend is not always negative. But by virtue of us bringing all the agency spend together, we're not seeing the difference between what you might call positive agency spend and negative agency spend. And as a consequence, it just made me think about whether or not, and it's not for a decision necessarily at all by this meeting, but whether or not the best place for some of the more detailed analysis of the performance in relation to what we might call human relations in its biggest sense could well be done in the individual scrutiny committees. Because a lot of the questions have been in relation to, let's say, the fire service, for example. So it's just something that I'd like us to think about. So the first real question is this agency spend not always negative. Could you just say a bit more about what you mean and why don't we split it into those categories of what we might call negative and positives?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. Thank you. So I guess the reason for the use of the term, if you like, positive, negative, I think trying to differentiate between the two terms might be difficult in terms of us having a view on that. But I think there are certain sectors, certain services that we provide within the council where we know there are national difficulties in recruitment. And it's impacted across the whole country. And so, in terms of us being able to deliver for our residents and services and service users, then clearly in some of those sectors, like we've talked about residential, within social work, field work, it's necessary to have appropriate professionals in there delivering so that we can continue to provide services. I guess on the back of that, I suppose it picks then up on, there's no doubt that if you don't recruit proactively, if you don't think of different initiatives to recruit and retain staff and simply rely on agency, then what is perceived, I guess, as positive agency could in fact become negative because you're not being proactive in the way you recruit. You're not thinking about how you retain staff and attract them. So agency spend can then rocket as a consequence of that. And I think that's when it becomes a real negative because the organisation is not trying to manage some of the issues that it's got. So I think our agency spend is in comparison to other councils is relatively low. So I hope does that help to some extent?
Yeah, yes, it does, and it makes it realise. Makes at least me realise that this is a complex issue, and I just wonder about this question of whether or not those sort of discussions would be best done in individual scrutiny committees in relation to. Just sure, bring you in a moment, Debbie. In relation to children's services, adults, fire and rescue, etc. But Debbie, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I think it links in with that as well. So it was just really to make the committee aware that there is a national issue in a number of workforces, but particularly children's social care, and I know that we've referred to that quite a bit in this meeting. The government is undertaking currently a consultation to apply greater standards to the agencies that employ children's social workers. So, for example, what they're saying within the consultation is that agencies should not be allowed to recruit and employ an individual with less than 5 years' experience. And there are a range of standards within that, really to try and make sure that appropriately trained people are working within agencies, and also to address the local authority pressures in terms of standards. That's something that the sector very much are welcoming in terms of those additional standards to act, I suppose, to encourage people to stay within local authorities, which is clearly where we want them to stay. The government's currently consulting. There's a bit more time left on the consultation. Unsurprisingly, local authorities were really positive about the consultation, and private agencies were not positive about the consultation. So I think we just need to wait and see in terms of whether the DFE will hold their nerve and implement that. And if it does, I think, again, there's something then in terms of how government could extend those standards into other areas as well. But that might be a particular issue that the children's scrutiny want to consider, seen as it is subject to a consultation at the moment.
I mean, children's services, yes, I can completely understand. But I was really pleased, and it's noteworthy that the fire service has reduced to below the target, not just 7.5 days of absence per person per year, but 6.85. Now, that could be explained by a new chief fire officer or equivalent, but it's about saying, in some cases, how and why have these figures changed? Because that's what we're here as the Scrutiny Committee to do. And I'd welcome some thoughts about one of them, a remarkable shift in relation to fire and rescue.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Parker. I mean, for me, it's you can't pin it down to one particular thing, but I think it is about leadership, which you've touched on. It's about effective use of resources, so that is around the workforce and how we deploy the skills that people have got. It's about health and wellbeing initiatives. It's about a number of different things that have a holistic approach to an impact on things like those figures. So I think for me, the actions of officers within the directorates and within the support functions, like within resources, are all having a positive impact. But that can only go so far. So, but I think in terms of the answer to the question, there's a whole number of reasons, which is why we have things like the people strategy to ensure that we are focusing on particular aspects of people and HR. But undoubtedly things like leadership, being supportive, listening to what staff are saying is also an important factor.
Fine, thanks. Anybody else want to speak? Yeah, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just to touch on a few points. First, the point that Debbie made. Certainly, children's have put. I know officers have, and I can only speak for myself. I've gone through the consultation myself on a personal basis and gone through it for the reasons you outlined. It is very important, and if it, as you say, if the DFE hold the nerve, it's going to make a massive positive difference from our perspective around retention of social workers and quality and how long we can keep them. My other point goes back to what Councillor Marfley said around how effective schools are at highlighting possible career paths, say, in not just social work, but that was one example he used, but I'll use planning as an example. I had no idea until I'd sat on district years and years ago. I had an interest in it, no idea what planning didn't do, because you just aren't made aware of these things, and unfortunately that happens across the piece with local government. And I think the difficulty we have is because schools are academised and very much we don't have as much of an input as we used to do. It's trying to find a way to get into those institutions so that we can, us as councillors and officers, sort of say, look, this is a career option. This has a massive implication. You know, you can go from one end to the other, and it's about attracting people into it. obviously around pensions and things, it's difficult because state pension age is going up and it's not going to come down anytime soon. So a lot of young people look at that and go, I want to earn money quicker and want to earn it now and not necessarily have as much when I retire. So there's that hurdle, but I think we need to do as much as we can do around sort of making them aware and empowering them to make their own choice and say, actually, no, this is what you can do, rather than from a position of, not ignorance, because that's not fair, but from a position of not being aware of what the actual options open to them are in terms of local government. Tony, just a quick one for yourself. In terms of apprenticeships, do we have anything that says that they do their apprenticeship and we've kept them for so many years after, or they've done it and they very say, for example, say quickly go? I know in terms of our social workers, they do stay for quite some time, but do we have any sort of more information in our other areas when they've done apprenticeships? Because I know that we don't have a clause now in terms of, no, you have to do X number of years. I know there used to be, but that was taken out some time ago.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. So in terms of, I think I can get figures for you in terms of potential retention. In terms of, anecdotally, we know for a fact that in business support, we have a lot of apprenticeships in business support, and the beauty of that is that they go on to work elsewhere within the council, not necessarily business support, but elsewhere within other directorates in professional roles. So it's definitely a talent pipeline for young people or younger people within Lincolnshire. That said, apprenticeships can apply to people of any age, and we do have older apprentices. In terms of the clause issue that you mentioned, where we're making significant investments within apprenticeships, for example, social work, and we are paying above apprenticeship rates for things as part of their training, then we do have retainer clauses within those contracts, because the council has made a significant investment in its, as an example, social work apprentices in children's services, and clearly by making that investment, by paying above apprenticeship rates, then clearly there's an expectation of inverted commas payback from the individual in terms of their staying with the organisation. So we do have those in some instances, if that's helpful. But I can try and get some figures on generally the sort of where people are going type thing.
Thank you. That'd be very helpful, Tony, just to get some context. Thank you.
Okay. Had a good debate. Anybody else want to speak? No? Okay. Thank you, Tony. What we've got is a proposal here, which I'm going to read out. I propose that the board has reviewed and has been assured on the HR management information and the progress made on the 2021-24 people strategy projects. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Okay. Anybody want to disagree or abstain? No. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. That's a seriously good debate. Okay, thank you. Can we move on to Scrutiny Committee work programmes? We've got two reports coming before us, Hugo on adults and Carl on Health Scrutiny Committee for Lincolnshire. Over to you, Hugo.
Thank you, Chairman. Just refer to the board to page 25 of the report to update you on items considered by the committee yesterday. So one of our items was digital and technology services. As part of this, we welcome the introduction of an 18-month pilot scheme to further develop digital and technical services. We would aim to avoid, replace or reduce the traditional use of care systems and increase the emphasis on prevention. We have stressed the importance of receiving feedback from service users on the pilot and would be considering its outcomes and including any relevant case studies in the summer of 2024. In some sense, it's about a transition of the way that we give information and assessments, and in effect it's going onto the website. What we basically are saying is let's try and get 80% of our services much slicker and quicker but bear in mind that 20% of people will not be able to always access internet and be in a position to basically use internet services. So it's not 100%, it's to go for the majority. And that majority also includes those that support the service users, family, friends that are there, that can access the information. And it wants to be basically easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to follow. So there's a lot of work going on that with the grants and the pilot scheme. It also talks about a predictive model of how we can start to predict some of the issues coming forward. And one of the areas that we highlighted would be that that'll be good in the future with like children's services, where we can predict what's going on with them and the services that need to come when they transform into adults. The other area was active recovery beds. The committee supported recommendations to the executive for the 6th of June 2023 for the procurement of active recovery bed services for 2023-24. The service was introduced in December 2022 and provides rehabilitation for eligible patients at residential care homes. This is basically to get people out of hospital and when they're not ready to go fully back to home because they need more support to get them back home. And so what we did was we commissioned 60 beds and we've realised that that was for the winter pressures. Now looking at the benefits of all of that, we have commissioned 40 beds going forward, which will run at very high occupancy of 80+% to basically reduce the home care pressures and actually stop them also going back into hospital. And it's been a very good success, and this is a sort of another pilot model that we're rolling out further because of the benefits into the relief pressures both to the NHS and to us. The scheme is funded by a ring-fenced government grant and is basically aiming to support this discharge. Just as a comparison, the cost figures of, in effect, this active bed recovery works out at about £150 a night, while in hospital, in the typical cost is around £465 a night. So, and it really does relieve the pressures off the NHS and the hospitals. Other areas were, as I just said in the previous agenda item, next steps on the reform of social care. This item focuses on the government's 2-year plan, which follows the government's previous 10-year plan in December of 2021. I.e., it's a bit of an interim just to basically get us through to the next election, to then somebody's going to have to open up and see what they want to do in terms of social care and NHS spend. But it basically incorporates, and it's about actually just basically reinforcing what's already out there, that we want to support people to live in their own home and basically develop the care workforce and the digital transformation and just joining up services. We are reassured that the Council was in good position to bid for any further targeted funding that might become available. Also, from central government was the Hewitt Review, an independent view of integrated care systems. The integrated care systems was introduced in July 2022, and this item focuses on the review of the arrangements carried out by Patricia Hewitt, whose 36 recommendations have been passed to the Secretary of State for Health and Care, whose response is still awaited. We were told that some of the recommendations would be easy for government to accept. However, other recommendations, such as the allocation of 1% of NHS funding on prevention, would be more difficult. Actually, I think 1% going to prevention shouldn't even be a consideration. It should be actually higher than that. Otherwise, if you don't put prevention at the forefront, you're never going to solve the headaches that are piling into the NHS. So I think something that we here actually take quite seriously is prevention. One item which was on pink paper, which is the adult daycare centre refurbishment of the Ancaster Daycare Centre in Lincoln. Basically, this item does contain exempt information, but the committee recommended the refurbishment for the Ancaster Day Centre to extend its offer, but not only that, it's time for a revamp of that day. I've been round it and it does need a revamp, and it's in the heart of Lincoln, and it's a valuable daycare service that we provide, and it's our property as well. In the addition to all of the above, we advise basically, here we go. So, the future is CQC will now become and inspect local authorities' adult care, social care deliveries from April 23 to better understand the quality of care in the local area. So CQC will now inspect us to ensure that we are delivering good care to our residents. It's now not just the care provider, it's actually incorporating the councils, and this has started from April 23. This will enhance transparency, improve local accountability, and help, and this is the good one, but we'll see, help to identify good practices so that more people can benefit from high quality care and support. We are the first to start this process. We have put ourselves forward to take on the mantlet, to actually be the pilot, and we are one of 3 councils that are in this process, and of being the pilot for the Care Quality Commission's assurance programme. They will be visiting the council in the beginning of the 3rd of July, and as a pilot we understand the ratings will be an indication in advance of formal inspection. It's basically, because it's a pilot scheme, what we will be given is a prediction rather than a formal arrangement, but it's due to start with all the other councils in October, and I think that it's a credit that we are basically the #1 lead on this. You know, it's 3 councils and we're the first to be done, and it's a credit that Glenn has put himself forward and his team to be inspected as a national thing, and I congratulate everyone in adults for this. They have to put all the information together at the beginning of June. They come and inspect in July, and actually the feedback is pretty quick. I think we are expected to hear how it's all gone by the end of July. Further activities, just on additional items to be added to the committee's work programme for 23, page 26, the 3rd item for the agenda on the 28th of June, the Lincolnshire Safeguarding Adults Board Prevention Strategy. Also on 26, for the 6th of April, the outcomes of the Care Quality Commission's assurance programme. Now that's not the council, that is the people that provide care within Lincolnshire. And the 3rd item is on the 29th of November, the recommissioning of the Lincolnshire Wellbeing Service. Any questions? Happy to take them. Thank you.
Very thorough report. Thank you. Eddie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Hugo, for your report. You mentioned on your meeting yesterday updating the digital services issues. What intrigues me, and perhaps it's not for you per se, Hugo, but for everybody really, is that I can't understand now in this digital age, and I'm no spring chicken as you can see, but I'm fairly au fait with digital services, etc. And I find that some people that are younger than me, sometimes 20 years younger than me, are still, it's anathema to go on digital, to try and get a computer or whatever. There must come a time, and this could apply to all local government, where we could see the decline of people that are not using digital services, if you see what I mean, so that perhaps they're easier to reach, is my point. Because obviously there are a lot of people, I think we mentioned it when we were talking about you know, the county news, for example, and indeed Tony's, when he gave his presentation, it was mentioned that, you know, there are some people that just won't do it. Now, given the fact that social media is so prevalent nowadays, and younger people are being taught in schools how to operate computers, etc. Even my 5-year-old granddaughter has been taught how to use a computer now. You know, it's amazing that how fast they learn. There must come a time when we just can cut down costs by getting to people on IT. And it'd be interesting to see if we could compare the years going forward. It may be an impossible task, and of course somebody needs to do it, which is always another issue. But to compare whether there is a decline in people needing personal service as opposed to those that can actually be contacted and dealt with through a digital means. That's my point anyway. Thank you, Hugo.
Big
Thank you,
question
Chairman.
for you there.
I'll come back. Interesting. A father of 3 kids, and all of sort of late teenage, early 20s. Their IT digital approach stuns me. They're brilliant on Snapchat. Brilliant on it. And actually, but they'll all come to me and go, Dad, what's this? How do I do that? And it's like, Google it, Google it. They do not understand the mode Google and how you can get all the information. And it just shows you their IT and their skills is completely different focus and approach to mine. And actually, the other area, we talk about adults, and I think I look at a lot of the adult stuff that we have on our website, and you flick through it, and by the way, we've got a lot of websites, so we have to be quite careful how we go forward with this, or else we end up, it goes everywhere, and there's so much information that it's overloaded, and it's not a pathway. But I think for me, you never often look at things very long when it's not got an impact on you. If actually, like adults, you suddenly have got either a relative or somebody or yourself where you actually then, oh, this has happened to me and I've got to do some research. It's amazing how much time and energy and you find the information, but you don't really, you scan through it on an internet when it's not applicable. But actually, we all dive quite well when it becomes applicable. So I think, but reality is, Eddie, that the world of social media and everything else, basically, as we've just seen lately, it spins out of control far quicker than what actually we can often adapt to it. And I think the classic case at the minute is the situation in Wales with the police and how that has just, social media has absolutely sent it in a different direction. And actually, the police are being caught completely off guard. And I think there is a lesson to be learnt that we have to watch what's true, really good information, and I tell you what, it's going to be a constant learning curve, and we haven't even really got into AI yet.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. And it's along the same area of questioning. I recently had a resident ask me a very simple question. Can I have a telephone number, general telephone number for LCC so I can ring? Hi, where's about a work permit? Can I find a general telephone number on our website? No. I can find everything for social services up to children's and adults, and I can find the ladies in reception. But can I actually find just a telephone number that sends them to the customer service centre so they can ring somebody? Oh no, that's too straightforward. And as you've already alluded to, Hugo, we have numerous websites for every little subsection under the sun. When actually, if you want people to use digital means, it's got to be one website. They don't want to trawl through 26 sub-menus, 20,000 websites to find information. And going back to your point, Eddie, it's not an age thing. I am 29, and if you say to me, talk to a robot or speak to a human being, I want a human being. I do not want a robot, because the robot doesn't get it right half the time, and then it says, oh, I'll have to refer you to a human anyway. And actually, I'm not being funny. I and everybody else pay rates. Actually, if I want a human, I want a human. I don't want to be told, oh, you have to do it online, which is what banks have essentially done. It's, oh, no, you have to go online because your nearest bank's 20 miles away. And the pushback from that is huge. And I don't want us to make the same mistake as a public body. I get the cost savings, but I don't want us to make the same mistake as a public body, because it's not an age thing. It's a lot of people, myself included actually, email has its place, but sometimes you just want to ring an officer, or you just want to speak to, if you're not, if it's not a council, like the gentleman from I was dealing with. He just wanted to speak to somebody because he was actually trying to do a job the following day. An email wouldn't have been quick enough. He wants a human being. So we've got to be very careful of pushing everything digitally, because you're going to get a lot of pushback, and not from where you'd think you'd get it either, because there are a lot of people that actually purposely want a human being to speak to, because they want to avoid using AI and other technology. I mean, as you said, we haven't really got to really complex AI and the issues that could throw up, moral and all the rest of it. That's a debate for a whole other day, but I think we've got to be very careful of pushing everything digital, because there are a lot of people, and it's not an age thing, that actually want a human being. And if we're going to go down the digital route, we have to seriously look at how our websites function. Because if you can't find a basic thing of go into our contacts page and I want a general telephone number, but you can find social care stuff, and then the ladies at reception, because the advice I gave them was, if you speak to the ladies at reception, they'll probably be able to transfer you to who you need to, because I couldn't find it and I know where I'm looking. If you're a member of the public, you're not going to have a hope in hell's chance.
Just on that,
Hang
Tom,
on, just a
it's
minute
called...
before you come in, Hugo. Interesting points made by Eddie. And I just wanted to make the point that this is Adult Scrutiny Wellbeing, Community Wellbeing Committee, which is the focal point of what we're talking about. So there's a whole list of things here we can be talking about. Access and the choice of access is part of it, and I'm sure that that will be taken into account. But it's about your report, Hugo, on adults community. That was just a reminder.
I just wanted to say, actually, that we do have a customer services where people actually are human beings, and the number is there, and they will put you through to any department. And so, yeah. On the flip side, though, a lot of what you say I don't disagree with, but I will refer back. Several years ago, we had a county councillor here that used to ring highways up, and we analysed the reports of who was blocking up the lines and everything else, and that councillor was onto the highways senior officer, and I think Martin will remember, but it wasn't minutes, it was hours in a week, and then it's like, well, this is why we have to stop it, because the person was saying all about how life was, and a cup of tea here, and a cake here, and all that, and it just went on and on and on.
Eddie, and I know you're going to talk about adults and community wellbeing, so...
Can I just... Chairman, could I just...
Sorry.
I mean, I've just gone on our website, and I've gone on to adults. Children's safeguarding, there is a number there. So just to say that you can find the numbers, but it is true that the number is not published at the front of the website, because we want to be as many people as possible to actually try and do stuff online.
So, Chairman, if I could clarify...
Hang on, can I just make a point? Yeah. Next time you need to know something, go to Martin. Okay, now, I want to move on to adult social care. Adults and communities. Anybody want to ask anything, Eddie, again?
No, I just want to clarify. I think Tom has missed my point, actually. It was all about a comparison and whether people are becoming more... people are becoming more and more educated towards using IT to find out what they need to find out. And of course, I agree that robots aren't the right thing. But if you need any instruction, Tom, on IT, I'll be happy to offer my services. Just the point about the customer services. I mean, Chairman, you'll know, because you used to be chairman of Value for Money Committee, and I was your vice chairman, and we used to go through the complaints procedures and the customer service, the responses, whether people were getting a response from customer services in the right time, etc. We did that every meeting, actually, on Value for Money. So I still feel that you can actually get the people you want. Now, you may have had a difficult experience with that, Tom, but quite honestly, I think, as Martin just said, you know, if you look into it, you can actually find them. But yeah, I agree. It's nice to talk to an adult instead of, you know, press 29 for, you know. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I think we can leave it there unless there's any more questions. Thanks, Hugo, for that report. Okay. So, Carl, you know, you're going to lead us on health.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll take the report as read, and I will just give an update, if I may, and I'll take questions at the end if there are any. So I'd like to start with the membership of the committee. As a result of the district council elections earlier this month, there has been a turnover in membership, with 6 new district councillors appointed. All new members are being offered training on the committee's roles and how it works. Our previous activity, which I'll refer to on page 29 of the report pack, I will update you from the 17th of May, firstly with Pilgrim Hospital's paediatric services. Since 2018, United Lincolnshire's Hospital NHS Trust has been refining its service model for paediatric services at Pilgrim Hospital and is now planning to launch a consultation on the 7th of June about making its refined service model permanent now. The committee supports the launch of a 12-week consultation and will be making a response to it. An item is listed in the work programme for the 14th of June. Secondly, I'd like to cover Manthorpe's unit of Grantham and District Hospital's extended closure. The Manthorpe unit is an inpatient ward for dementia patients with severe and complex needs. The unit has been closed since April 2020, with staff redeployed to other mental health services as part of the response to the pandemic. This has included setting up a dementia home treatment team. Last week, Lincolnshire Partnership NHS Foundation Trust advised the committee that it is keeping the unit closed for a further year, in effect extending the pilot. LPFT has advised it will continue its public engagement on this service development and has advised that the East Midlands Clinical Senate will be independently evaluating the pilot, which the committee welcomes. We will consider the Senate's report when it does become available. Thirdly, I'd like to cover the Hearts Home Centre, which is Lincolnshire's male psychiatric intensive care unit. A psychiatric intensive care unit, often referred to as a PQ, provides a specialised level of care to patients with mental health needs. Lincolnshire's PQ for male patients is based at Hearts Home Centre in Lincoln, which was temporarily closed in November 2022. The committee recorded its support for the work to date to increase staffing and the future projected timeline for reopening the Hearts Home Centre in Lincoln, and requested that the Lincolnshire Partnership NHS Foundation Trust advises the committee of any further developments, including any changes to the proposed timelines, with an update at the committee's September 2023 meeting. In terms of future activity, there are a number of changes to the work programme, with the 19th of July being split and taking over several meetings because these issues and items are quite large. Firstly, the developments in mental health services, where the focus in July may be community mental health services and urgent and emergency care, where the focus in July will be Grantham's Urgent Treatment Centre. I'd also like to cover something on the Quality Accounts Working Group. As happens at this time each year, the committee has had a working group reviewing the annual accounts of the care provided. At the first meeting on Tuesday, the working group reviewed the quality accounts of Northern Lincolnshire and Gould's NHS Foundation Trust and the East Midlands Ambulance Service. Next week, on the 1st of June, the committee will be reviewing the quality accounts of Lincolnshire's Community Health Services NHS Trust and United Lincolnshire's NHS Trust. That's my update. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Can you just say just a tiny bit more, if it's possible, about the temporary closure of Lincolnshire Male Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit? Because it seems to be a long drawn out affair, actually, and I don't think you were quite able to make it clear when it's likely to reopen. But could you just flesh that out for us?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. The issue is that they've had problems with recruitment and retention, and so they had to move the resources into other areas so that there wasn't problems arising and that they could ensure that they continued a duty of care elsewhere. But they're looking around about, I think, 12 months further. They want to be quicker than that, and ideally, as soon as they've recruited enough staff, they will reopen it. But they have been very, very clear with us that that is what they wish to do. There won't be, let's say, a situation like Grantham where we've heard it's a temporary closure and it's remained closed. So they have given us that reassurance. But the problem is, it is a very sort of specialised level of care, which does make it much more difficult to recruit to. But there is that commitment there. But at the moment in time, people are having to be going out of area, which is something the committee is very seriously concerned about. So that's sort of where we are at the moment, Chairman.
Just one further question. Why do they think that it will be easier to recruit the qualified staff that's needed in 12 months? What's going to happen in 12 months that suddenly staff become available where they're not available in 6 months or 3 months?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think the sort of ideal situation is that it will be within 12 months. They can't guarantee it, and as I say, they would like to go earlier with it. But they're looking at more flexible ways of working, so it may well be that someone who works in there, it's quite a stressful role. So potentially they might be able to do, 2 days in another part of the mental health trust and 3 days working in the unit, and so that it keeps it, a little bit more easier for them to deal with the pressure that's involved with that type of care. So I think that they feel by changing the contract and the way that they're going to be working moving forward, that that's going to be more attractive to people coming forward.
Right, anybody else want to... Excuse me. Hugo wanted to ask a question. Yep, Hugo, thank you.
Thank you. Slightly different note, but thank you for your updates. I've just done a health check, an NHS health check. Quite interesting. Cholesterol's a little bit high. You get a leaflet, doesn't really tell you what you shouldn't eat. It just gets a bit complicated, which is actually not very simple. But the one thing that really I struggle a bit with, prostate cancer in males is a massive issue, and yet we fail to really screen it. To get a blood test, you can get a blood test which will pick it up really quite quickly, but yet we will not offer that as a service. And if you could take it back and start to challenge this, every male over 50 should be given a prostate test to actually, because that, again, if you, I hate to say the pun, nip it in the bud and catch it early, you will actually, the cost saving is phenomenal. And actually you have a much better chance of survival. And it's like we screen for breast cancer, but males are left behind with prostate. And I think that actually it should be, if you're going for a health check, you should be able to get the blood test done for that. I have requested it and I'm having mine checked. Well, it's being done now. But, it shouldn't be that I had to then go to the GP to actually get it. It should be, they're blood testing me anyway, so why can't they just do the test? And it's something that I'm going to take back to the ICB, because I think something, it's one of those things, we should address it and take a bit more proactiveness with this.
Anything possible?
I mean, we're certainly something we can pick up. I do believe it was raised previously in a committee meeting anyway, so it will be there within the work programme. We can look at it again and see what we can do, certainly.
Thank you. Right, Mike, was that your question? No? Okay. Yep. Nobody else wants to speak? Okay, fine, thank you. You do want to speak?
No, I'm fine, thank you, Chair.
Okay. So, if we can move on, sorry, just come to the point. In relation to both of the reports that we've had, I propose that the board is satisfied with the activity undertaken since February 2023, the planned work programmes for both adult and health scrutiny committees. If you agree that the work undertaken is satisfactory, can you indicate, please? Anybody against? Anybody abstaining? No? Then that's carried. Thank you. That's agreed. Overview and scrutiny work programme. This item, it's been circulated and information only. There is one amendment to the published programme. The report on the draft infrastructure funding statement for 2022-3 has been brought forward from the 23rd of November to the 26th of October, and I'm sure you all wanted to know that. Okay, thank you. That now concludes the business for the meeting. Thanks for your attendance and your contributions. Thanks.